Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. So I have two plans, and one of these plans is necessary for solving the budget, for creating a massing farming program, one here and one abroad, for affordable housing, and more. So in the 400 billion plan, it involves a hyper-progressive tax plan for the top 40%. There's a special consideration for the bottom half of the top 40%. For example, someone worth only $200,000 would only pay maybe $800 a year tops. The money would be used as follows: $180 billion for my war on poverty plan, $120 billion for a global farming plan, and $100 billion a year to pay back the debt. The $500 billion plan is basically the same, except for there's $200 billion for paying back the debt every year, for balancing the budget every year. With my war on poverty plan, it's a 7-point plan. There's wealth taxes, for tiny homes and various services for the homeless with an emphasis on tiny homes. There's vice taxes, which is the second point, and pet food and luxury and fast food taxes and jewelry taxes. Reasonable, very reasonable, affordable taxes, mind you. The third point is $5 a month as part of the war on poverty plan. And the vice taxes and the $5 a month are on top of these plans. They're $5 a month for people who are worth less than $1 million. And it's a progressive plan, because keep in mind, we'll either be taxing the rich for $400 billion a year or $500 billion a year. And there'll be a lot of services for the poor. So this makes a lot more sense than you might think. Point number 4 is affordable housing. Right? We'll spend tens of billions of dollars on affordable housing. Point number 5, there's programs, right? Job programs, 1 to 2 hours for people who are drug addicts who need quick money. Keep in mind it organizes the situation a lot more and helps keep an eye on them, as well as keeps them from, robbing things like, copper from light poles, mugging people, what have you. There's also online programs and special programs for schools to restructure the school system for those who learn differently, those who want a traditional education. They have it. Those who learn differently, they need those programs, as well as from school to work programs. This is designed to get a lot of people off of welfare over time and to save $200 billion a year from getting people off of welfare. So the problem is not welfare. I can't stress that enough. The problem is fraud and waste and ineffective spending, inefficient spending. The problem is cultural. The problem is social. And absolutely the problem has to do with bad politics, so it's political. It's not very hard to restructure the school system and to create jobs, working with the private sector and the government sector as well. But these tax plans will have the opportunity to do that. What is at stake here is a democracy with the logical tax plan that is needed to maintain a democracy versus an oligarchy. What is at stake here is democracy. Now keep in mind that I do not believe in democracy. I believe in a moral monarchy, as I'm monotheistic. However, I know most people aren't smart enough to understand the difference. They're not smart enough to follow the right monarch or leader. And so I'm recommending this for people, especially when after my flesh dies, I am 100% certain that no one is qualified at that point. And from that point on, to lead. Pretty straightforward. So again, in the $400 billion plan, it is hyper-progressive. It's a tax plan for the top 40% with a special consideration for the bottom half of them. So the top 20% have a very hyper-progressive tax with emphasis on the top 7% or so, which are the millionaires and up class. And the bottom 20% of the top 40% have special considerations. So for example, someone worth maybe $3 million, I'd expect to tax them at a rate of about $16,000 more every year. $16,000 more in taxes. In 10 years, that'll be $160,000. In 20 years, that's $320,000. However, if the person owns a house that's worth maybe $2 million, okay, in 20 years, that house might be worth $4 million. So the person could be very much, it should be very easy for someone worth $3 million to be worth more than they are now in 20 years. Even with this tax plan. This is not a communist tax plan, so to speak. This is not a plan that creates communism. This is a plan that checks the corporate greed and the greed in general that ruins capitalism, that makes it so capitalism fails. Capitalism does not have to fail. When people don't scramble to focus on what's important and to prioritize, when people don't do what's right, then capitalism fails. When people aren't moral enough to make capitalism succeed, capitalism fails. So again, the spending goes as follows. $180 billion for the War on Poverty plan. If you have any questions about that, put in the comments. $120 billion a year for Global Farming Plan, and $100 billion a year to pay off the debt. $200 billion if it's the $500 billion plan instead. And I caution you about passing the $500 billion plan because there's going to be a lot of pushback to either plan. Hell, there's a lot of pushback to my War on Poverty plan. They refuse to pass it, even though it's only $5.4 trillion over 30 years, only $180 billion a year. I start off with a plan that was only $60 billion a year, and they refused to pass that, even though it would have ended homelessness. For extremely affordable wealth taxes, it comes with extremely affordable wealth taxes, and it would have ended homelessness certainly by now. I proposed it back in 2021, and politicians failed to insist on it and pass it. So they're making it harder for me to speak because I'm clearly right. I'm sure you people all know about their dirty tricks by now. But it's clear here that when we look at the timeline and we say, hey, 10 years from now, do we want to have spent $1.2 trillion feeding the people who are starving all over the world on a planet where 9 million people starve to death every year? When the people who are hungry here can simply organize and get politicians to address their needs, when there's tons and tons of food being wasted in America, when we simply have to redistribute that food more effectively. Do you really want to be that petty nation that says you want the stupid trinkets, the stupid excess stuff, the junk that people buy every year? More than you want to feed children that are starving, 3 million children starving to death and dying of hunger-related issues every year? Another 6 million adults every single year? 25,000 people starve to death every day. Can you look them in the eye and say you'd rather have some fancy schmancy nonsense that doesn't oppress anybody, but in your mind it does? Maybe your stupid friends think it's cool. Would you rather have that? Or would you rather have fed millions of people who are starving to death right now? Those people who say America first without presenting a viable counterargument are just saying greed first. They're not really saying America first. They're saying greed first. They're saying evil first. Because it is better for every American that we feed people who are starving while addressing the budget issues at the same time, while housing the homeless at the same time, than it is for them to be ineffective, inefficient, and insufficient greedy scum. What is your viable counterargument? It is impossible to have a viable counter argument. Thank you. So even a little kid can tell you that the souls of everyone who interferes with God's work, especially on economic issues, because so many people suffer and die over those issues, they'll be punished to the extreme forever, as well as the souls of their families, unless their families are obeying God through me. The closer you are to the core problem, the more your souls suffer. Now, usually when we talk about this, I talk about this with the oppressors. They like to say things like they're not oppressed, until I bring up the fact that 189,000 people die every day, and that's 777 of them in California alone. Imagine being some kind of pompous worm that thinks you're doing something for white, Jewish, or LGBT supremacy. And in this state we're in right now, there's 777 people are going to die in this state. 58% of the homeless in San Diego are white. For people who like to say, hey, it's disproportionately minorities, so that makes it okay. It's clear that I'm right and that they're wrong. And that it's stupid to play little numbers games, because I've been saying for years, everyone scramble, obey God through me, let's get the facts here, because they're trying to confuse me about them, but it doesn't change the fact of what must be done. The war on poverty plan is sound. They have no viable counterargument. They're resorting to fact-check games, trying to make it hard for me to find the facts. You see, the news and the government websites tend to put out contradicting facts. The latest fact we have is that there's over $1 trillion spent on over 80 welfare programs. Then they play a cute little game of how do you slice it, and a semantics game of what qualifies as welfare and what doesn't. Very, very sick. Very, very sick.